Commander Kexaval limped into the Grand War Council chamber, its massive frame casting twisted shadows across the polished floor. The other Thrakri commanders had heard whispers of his return from the human territories, but seeing him now shocked them into silence. His once proud scales were cracked and scarred, several missing entirely to reveal the pale flesh beneath. His left arm hung useless at his side, and 2 of his 4 eyes had been replaced with crude mechanical implants that glowed with an eerie red light. The war. The council consisted of the 12 most powerful military leaders in the Thrakri Empire. Each had conquered dozens of worlds, enslaved countless species, and built their reputations on the blood of lesser beings. Yet as Kexaval approached the speaking platform, even these hardened warriors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Something about his presence felt wrong. It's broken in a way that went beyond physical wounds. High Commander Zektar, the most senior member of the council, gestured for Kexaval to begin his report. The chamber's lights dimmed automatically, casting everything in an ominous glow that seemed fitting for what was to come. Kexaval cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the vast chamber like a death rattle. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the impossible and lived to tell about it. Honored commanders, brothers in conquest, masters of 1,000 worlds, he began, his words measured and deliberate. I stand before you today, not as the warrior who left our homeworld 6 months ago, but as something far less. I am a survivor of humanity, and that survival has cost me more than flesh and bone. He gestured to his scarred body with his good arm. These wounds you see are nothing compared to what they did to my mind, to my understanding of warfare itself. What I witnessed in human space will haunt our species for generations to come, assuming we live long enough to pass down the tale. Council members exchanged glances. They had expected a standard defeat report, perhaps some tactical insights about a stubborn but ultimately manageable species. What they were hearing sounded like the ravings of a broken mind, Kexaval noticed. Their skepticism and pressed on. When intelligence first briefed us about the humans, the data seemed almost laughable. A young species barely 300 years into space travel. Their ships looked like metal boxes held together with primitive welding. Their weapons were crude chemical projectiles and basic energy beams. By all accounts, they should have been conquered within days. Paused, his mechanical eyes worry as they adjusted their focus. We encountered their first fleet near the Epsilon sector, just outside their solar system. 47 of their ships against our battle group of 120 vessels. The odds were so overwhelmingly in our favor that I almost felt sorry for them. Commander Velkin, known for his impatience, leaned forward. Get to the point, Kexaval. What went wrong? A bitter laugh escaped Kexaval's throat. Everything, brother. Everything went wrong from the very first moment. He began pacing slowly across the platform, his damaged leg dragging slightly. The human fleet was arranged in what appeared to be a defensive formation. Their flagship, a battered-looking vessel they called the Soul, was commanded by Admiral June. When our sensors first locked onto him, we saw a middle-aged human with calm eyes and graying hair. He looked more like a scholar than a warrior. Kexaval's voice took on a darker tone. That was our first mistake. Judging humans by their appearance, the holographic display in the center of the chamber activated, showing a tactical recreation of the battle. The Thrakri fleet appeared as red dots, vastly outnumbering the blue dots, representing the human ships. I opened communications and delivered the standard surrender demand. Kexaval continued. Every species we had encountered before either surrendered immediately or attempted to negotiate terms. The humans did neither. The hologram showed the human flagship moving forward directly toward the Thrakari battle line. Admiral June responded to our surrender demand with a simple message. No, not we refuse, or we will negotiate. Just no. Then he did something that defied all military logic. Ordered his entire fleet to advance directly toward our superior force. High Commander Zektar frowned. Suicide tactics. Some species resort to that when cornered. That's what we thought, Kexaval replied. So I ordered warning shots fired across their bow, expecting them to come to their senses. Instead, something happened that I still don't fully understand. The hologram showed energy beams lancing out from the Thrakri fleet toward the approaching human ships. The moment our weapons fired, every human in that fleet began to smile, not grimace, not show fear or determination. They smiled like they had just received wonderful news. Their communications channels lit up with chatter, and our translators picked up fragments. Finally, some action. About time. This is going to be fun. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The concept of enjoying combat was not entirely foreign to the Thrakri, but taking pleasure in overwhelming odds was another matter entirely. Captain Rin, commanding their destroyer Buzan, transmitted a message that chilled me to my core, Kexaval continued. Her voice was perfectly calm, almost cheerful, as she said, "Welcome to our neighborhood, boys. Hope you brought enough body bags. Because we're about to give you a lesson in human hospitality." The battle recreation on the hologram began to accelerate, showing the human ships suddenly breaking formation and scattering in all directions. What happened next defied every military protocol known to civilized warfare, Kexaval said, his voice growing hollow. The humans didn't attempt to match our formation or use any recognizable tactical doctrine. Only describe as controlled chaos. The hologram showed human ships moving in seemingly random patterns, some diving beneath the Thrakari formation, others climbing above it, and several heading straight for the largest enemy vessels. Their small fighters, piloted by warriors whose names I would later learn to fear, began ramming maneuvers that no sane species would attempt. Pilot Han, flying a craft barely larger than our escape pods, somehow managed to evade 17 different weapon systems while heading straight for my command ship. Kexaval touched one of his facial scars unconsciously. He was broadcasting over open channels the entire time, and our computers were recording everything. I have listened to that recording 1,000 times since, trying to understand what kind. A being could laugh with such genuine joy while flying towards certain death. The council chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of the holographic projectors. Han crashed his fighter directly into my bridge, Kexaval continued, but not before transmitting one final message that our entire fleet heard. "Ugly. Thanks for the dance. See you in hell." Then he laughed, actually laughed, as his ship exploded and took half my command crew with him. The hologram froze on the moment of impact, showing the tiny human fighter striking the massive Thrakari dreadnought. "That was just the beginning," Kexaval whispered. "Over the next 4 hours, those 47 human ships would teach us that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong." The War Council chamber grew colder as Kexaval continued his testimony. His mechanical eyes flickered as painful memories surfaced, each one etched into his damaged mind like scars on metal. 3 days after the first battle, we thought we understood their tactics, Kexaval said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We believed the ramming attacks were desperation, the work of untrained pilots with nothing to lose. Command ordered me to engage their carrier groups near the asteroid belt of their outer system. We expected an easier fight." He gestured weakly toward the holographic display, which shifted to show a new battle scenario. Dozens of small human fighters swarmed around massive Thrakari carriers like angry insects around a giant predator. Lieutenant Commander Yu was leading Falcon Squadron that day. Intelligence had identified her as one of their ace pilots, with over 30 confirmed kills against our forces. What we didn't know was that humans don't just fight for victory, they fight for their friends. The hologram zoomed in on a single human fighter, sleek and deadly as it danced between the massive gun turrets of a Thrakari carrier. The ship bore the markings of the human pilot, including a painted message that read "For Earth and Honor." Yu's wingman was a young pilot named Kim, Kexaval continued. Barely out of training according to the intercepted communications. They had been flying together for less than 2 months, but the way they moved in formation, you would think they had been brothers for years. The battle reconstruction showed the 2 human fighters working in perfect harmony, covering each other's movements as they struck at the carrier's vulnerable points. Their coordination was flawless, almost telepathic in its precision. Then our port cannon got a lucky shot, Kexaval said, his voice growing even more hollow. Kim's fighter took a direct hit. The explosion lit up space like a small star, and when the light faded, there was nothing left but debris. The hologram faithfully recreated the moment, showing the human fighter disappearing in a brilliant flash of light and energy. That's when we learned what happens when you kill a human's friend in front of them, Kexaval whispered. You didn't scream or cry or call for backup like any rational being would. She went completely silent for exactly 10 seconds. Then she began to speak. The Thrakari commander's good hand trembled as he remembered. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, as she opened a channel to our entire fleet. Commander Yu, of the Earth Defense Force, she said. You just killed my wingman. His name was Kim, and he was 22 years old. He had a sister back on Earth, who made him promise to come home safe. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The idea of personalizing combat was foreign to their military doctrine. Then she did something that defied all tactical sense. Kexaval continued. Instead of retreating or calling for reinforcements, she began hunting our pilots one by one. Not random targets, not strategic strikes, individual pilots. The hologram showed Youth Fighter moving with impossible precision through the battlefield, seeking out specific targets with surgical accuracy. She would identify each pilot before she killed them, Kexaval said, his voice cracking. Our communications were being monitored, so she knew our call signs, our ranks, even some of our names. Pilot Drakver, you were the one who shot Kim. This is for him. Then she would destroy their fighter with a single, perfectly placed shot. The holographic display showed human and Thrakari fighters engaged in deadly combat. But Yu's ship moved differently from the others. Where her fellow humans fought with aggressive tactics, she moved like a predator stalking prey. She killed 7 of our best pilots in 12 minutes, Kexaval reported. Each time she would announce their name and dedication before firing. Squadron Leader Nektar, this is for Kim's sister. Wing Commander Veldrek, this is for the promise he couldn't keep. High Commander Zektar leaned forward. How did one pilot achieve such success against trained warriors? Because she wasn't fighting a battle anymore, Kexaval replied. She was conducting a funeral service, and we were the offerings. Every kill was a prayer for her dead friend. Every victory a memorial to his sacrifice. The hologram showed the climactic moment when multiple Thrakari fighters finally cornered Yu's damaged craft. Her ship was trailing atmosphere and debris, clearly beyond repair. We had her trapped, Kexaval said. 6 fighters surrounding 1 damaged enemy. By all rights, she should have ejected and surrendered. Instead, she transmitted one final message to her squadron. Tell Kim's sister he died like a hero. Tell her I'm coming to apologize in person. The reconstruction showed Yu's fighter suddenly accelerating directly toward the largest group of Thrakari ships. She overloaded her reactor while flying straight into our port squadron, Kexavel whispered. The explosion took out 8 of our fighters and crippled our main carrier. As her ship broke apart, we could hear her laughing over the communications channel. Not the mad laughter of someone who had lost their mind, but the satisfied laughter of someone who had just accomplished exactly what they set out to do. The holographic display shifted to show ground combat on a rocky industrial world. Mining equipment and prefabricated buildings dotted the landscape while human and Thrakari forces clashed among the installations. The ground assault on mining. Station 7 was supposed to be routine, Kexavel continued. 1,000 of our best warriors against 50 human defenders. Colonel Bin was in command of their forces, an old soldier who had supposedly retired to oversee mining operations. The display showed the human defensive positions, cleverly hidden among the industrial equipment and underground tunnels. We expected them to surrender when they saw our numbers, Kexavel said. Instead, Bin transmitted a message to our landing force. Welcome to 7, boys. We've been expecting you. Hope you don't mind getting your hands dirty, because we've prepared something special just for you. The battle reconstruction showed Thrakari forces advancing confidently toward the human positions, only to encounter resistance that seemed to come from the very ground itself. They had turned the entire mining complex into a weapon, Kexavel reported. Excavation charges became mines, drilling equipment became automated guns, and the tunnel system became a maze of death traps that would make our ancestors proud. The hologram showed human defenders using industrial tools as weapons with devastating effect. Mining lasers cut through Thrakari armor like paper, while excavation vehicles became improvised tanks. Private Nam was operating a tunnel-boring machine when my troops cornered her section, Kexavel whispered. She was just a maintenance worker, not even a trained soldier. When 3 of our warriors broke through her barricade, she could have surrendered. Instead, she activated the drilling charges while hugging all 3 of them. Commander's voice broke slightly. Hello. The last thing our battlefield recorders captured was her voice, clear and strong. See you on the other side, boys. Then she laughed as the explosives detonated, taking herself and my warriors with her. The War Council sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Every human death only made the survivors more dangerous, Kexavel concluded. It was as if losing their friends activated something primal in them, something that transformed grief into fury, and fury into unstoppable determination. By the end of that battle, my 1,000 warriors had been reduced to less than 200. The 50 humans had fought us to a standstill. He looked around the chamber with his mismatched eyes. So when I realized we weren't fighting soldiers, we were fighting something far more terrifying. We were fighting humans who had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. Kexavel. Remaining natural, I twitched as he recalled the moment when everything changed. The proud Thrakari commander who had once boasted of conquering entire star systems now spoke with the broken voice of someone who had learned to fear the darkness. The 3rd month marked the beginning of our true nightmare, he said. His mechanical implants worry softly as they focused on distant memories. Up until that point, we had been the hunters. We chose when to attack, where to strike, which targets to eliminate. The humans fought back, yes, but they were still reacting to our moves. He paused, his scaled hide rippling with involuntary muscle spasms. Then Major Dahl arrived with his special operations team, and suddenly we weren't the predators anymore. We became the prey. The holographic display shifted to show a 3-dimensional map of 5-star systems, with red lines indicating Thrakari supply routes and blue dots marking human strike teams. The blue dots seemed to be everywhere at once, striking with perfect timing and coordination. Dahl was different from the other human commanders we had encountered, Kexavel continued. Admiral June was brilliant in open combat. Colonel Bin was devastating in defensive operations, but Dahl was something else entirely. He was a hunter who understood that the most dangerous prey is the kind that doesn't know it's being stalked. The hologram zoomed in on a convoy of Thrakari supply ships moving through what should have been secure space. The vessels were massive, heavily armored, and escorted by a full squadron of fighters. Our intelligence had no record of Dahl before the war began, Kexavel reported. He appeared in their military databases only after the conflict started, as if he had been created specifically to fight us. Later, We learned he had been working in what humans call black operations for over 15 years. Reconstruction showed the human strike team approaching the convoy with impossible stealth. Their ship somehow invisible to Thrakari sensors until the moment they struck. The first we knew of their presence was when our escort fighters began exploding, Kexaval said. Not from missile strikes or energy weapons, but from internal explosions. Somehow Dahl's team had managed to plant charges inside our own ships, without triggering a single alarm. The holographic display showed the convoy's desperate attempts to escape as human fighters materialized from nowhere, attacking with surgical precision before vanishing back into the void. That was when we realized the humans had been studying us far longer than we had been studying them, Kexaval admitted. They knew our patrol schedules, our communication frequencies, even the personal habits of our crew members. It was as if they could see inside our minds. High Commander Zektar leaned forward with interest. How did they gather such detailed intelligence? Agent High Kexavel whispered, the name carrying more fear than any curse word in the Thrakari language. She was the key to everything, though we didn't know it at the time. The hologram shifted to show the interior of a massive Thrakari command ship, its corridors bustling with activity as crew members went about their duties. High had been aboard our flagship for 3 weeks before we even knew humans could infiltrate our ships. Kexavel continued. She disguised herself as one of our maintenance drones. The small robotic units that crawl through the ventilation systems to perform routine repairs. The reconstruction showed a small humanoid figure moving through the ship's air ducts with incredible stealth, avoiding detection by staying perfectly still whenever crew members passed below. She learned our language by listening to our conversations, Kexaval reported. She memorized our duty schedules by watching our movements. Most importantly, she discovered our psychological weaknesses by observing how we reacted to stress. The display showed High carefully installing small devices throughout the ship's communication system, each one no larger than a fingernail but capable of hijacking the entire network. The devices she planted were works of art, Kexavel said with grudging admiration. They integrated seamlessly with our technology, becoming part of our own systems. We couldn't detect them because they weren't foreign objects anymore. They had become part of the ship itself. The hologram showed the moment when High's psychological warfare campaign began. Throughout the ship, speakers that normally carried tactical information began broadcasting something entirely different. It started with whispers, Kexaval remembered, his voice growing distant. Soft voices speaking in human languages we didn't understand. Our translation computers couldn't identify the words, but somehow the meaning was clear. They were children's voices singing lullabies. Several council members shifted uncomfortably as the implications became clear. Songs played at random. Intervals, Kexavel continued. Sometimes during meals, sometimes during sleep cycles, sometimes in the middle of combat operations. There was no pattern. No way to predict when they would start or stop. The reconstruction showed Thrakari crew members becoming increasingly agitated as the mysterious voices continued their haunting songs throughout the ship. Within a week, my warriors were jumping at shadows, Kexavel reported. Veterans who had fought in 100 battles were afraid to walk the corridors alone. The singing was driving them mad, but we couldn't find the source, the hologram showed. Engineering teams frantically searching the ship's systems, tearing apart communication panels and ventilation ducts in a desperate attempt to locate the mysterious devices. That's when Captain Soul made his move, Kexavel said, his voice growing. Bitter. While we were distracted by the psychological warfare, he was implementing the second phase of their plan. The display shifted to show a Thrakari heavy cruiser drifting in space, its hull scarred by battle damage, but its systems still functional. Soul had been captured during the battle at Kepler Station, Kexaval explained. We thought he was just another prisoner, valuable only for interrogation. He had no idea he was actually a specialist in alien technology. The reconstruction showed the human captain being escorted to the captured cruiser, ostensibly for questioning about human defensive capabilities. While our interrogators were trying to break him, Soul was studying our ship, Kexavel continued. He learned our computer systems, our weapons configurations, even our tactical doctrines, all under the guise of being a defeated prisoner. Hologram showed Soul working with apparent cooperation, answering questions about human military capabilities while secretly memorizing every detail of Thrakari technology. When he finally escaped, he didn't just steal the ship, Kexavel reported. He improved it. He upgraded our weapons systems with human innovations, enhanced our engines with techniques we had never considered, and reprogrammed our computers with algorithms that made them more efficient than anything we had ever built. The display showed the captured cruiser emerging from a hidden asteroid base, its hull gleaming with new modifications, and its weapons systems glowing with enhanced power. Sol began using our own ship to hunt our convoys, Kexavel said. He would appear on our sensors as a friendly vessel, broadcasting the correct identification codes and following proper protocols. Our ships would approach without suspicion, and then he would strike. The reconstruction showed several ambush scenarios, each one more devastating than the last, as Sol's captured cruiser lured Thrakari battle groups into carefully prepared traps. Worst part was that he made our technology work better than we ever could, Kexavel admitted. Our own weapons were more accurate in his hands, our own engines were faster under his command, and our own computers were more intelligent following his programming. The holographic display showed a final confrontation between Sol's enhanced cruiser and a full Thrakari battle group. The single human-controlled ship outmaneuvering and outfighting 5 enemy vessels. By the end of the 3rd month, we had lost more ships to our own technology than to human weapons, Kexavel concluded. Sol had proven that our greatest weakness wasn't our tactics or our training. It was our inability to think like humans. He looked around the War Council chamber with his mismatched eyes. They didn't just steal our ships and weapons. They made them better. They took our own creations and turned them into something we couldn't recognize, something that served them more faithfully than it had ever served us. The War Council chambers seemed to grow darker as Kexavel prepared to recount the most horrifying chapter of his encounters with humanity. His mechanical eyes dimmed, as if even the artificial components couldn't bear to witness the memories he was about to share. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything we believe about warfare, about civilization, about the very nature of intelligent life. Kexavel began, his voice barely audible. The 4th phase of our conflict didn't just show us human military capability. It revealed what they become when their backs are truly against the wall. Holographic display materialized to show a massive space station orbiting a blue-green world. The structure was clearly human in design, with multiple research modules connected by rotating corridors that gleamed like silver threads against the starfield. Research Station Omega-7 was supposed to be our easiest target, Kexavel continued. Intelligence reports indicated it was a civilian facility, home to 300 scientists, engineers, and their families. No military installations, no weapons platforms, no defensive systems worth mentioning. The hologram zoomed in to show the station's details more clearly. Gardens could be seen through transparent sections, children's play areas, laboratories, filled with peaceful scientific equipment. General Tak was in command of the station's defense, Kexavel reported. A career military officer, but supposedly retired to oversee research operations. We thought he would be reasonable, that he would understand the futility of resistance. The display showed the arrival of Kexavel's fleet. Dozens of Thrakari warships surrounding the defenseless research station, like predators circling wounded prey. I opened communications expecting a quick surrender, Kexavel said. Instead, General, Tak's response was unlike anything we had encountered before. He simply said, "You have 30 seconds to leave our space, or you'll discover what humans do when you threaten our children." The hologram showed the research station's external light suddenly shifting from peaceful white to ominous red, indicating some kind of alert status. We thought it was a bluff, Kexavel admitted. A civilian research station against a full battle fleet. The odds were so ridiculous that several of my officers actually laughed when they heard Tak's ultimatum. The reconstruction showed Thrakari ships moving into bombardment positions, their weapons charging for what should have been a swift and decisive strike. That's when we learned that humans don't distinguish between soldiers and civilians the way we do. Kexavel continued, his voice growing hollow. When threatened, every human becomes a warrior, regardless of age, training, or occupation. Display shifted to show the interior of the research station, where scenes of organized chaos were unfolding. Scientists were rapidly converting their laboratories, while families gathered in what appeared to be defensive positions. Professor A was a biochemist, specializing in agricultural research, Kexival reported. Within hours of our arrival, she had transformed her plant genetics laboratory into a chemical weapons production facility. She was using her knowledge of alien biology to create compounds specifically designed to target our respiratory systems. The hologram showed the elderly human woman working with intense focus, her gentle researcher's hands now crafting instruments of death with scientific precision. The most disturbing part was how naturally they adapted, Kexival said. There was no panic, no confusion, no moral hesitation. They simply accepted that their peaceful life was over and immediately began preparing for war. The reconstruction showed human children, some barely old enough to walk, helping to carry supplies and assemble crude but effective explosive devices under the supervision of their parents. Even the youngest humans contributed to the defense, Kexival whispered. They turned the station's educational facilities into weapons workshops, using chemistry sets and engineering tools to create instruments of destruction. The display showed the siege as it unfolded over the following months. Each day brought new horrors as the humans found increasingly creative ways to inflict casualties on their attackers. Dr. Mal had been the station's chief medical officer, Kexival continued, a healer who had dedicated her life to saving others. But when we threatened her patients, her family, her home, she became something far more dangerous than any soldier. The hologram showed the medical bay being systematically converted into a biological warfare laboratory, with sophisticated equipment being repurposed for military applications. She studied samples of our dead, learning our biology, understanding our weaknesses, Kexival reported. Then she began creating diseases specifically engineered to target Thrakari physiology. The reconstruction showed human prisoners being prepared for exchange, bodies carrying invisible biological weapons that would soon spread through the Thrakari fleet. They sent us 12 prisoners as a gesture of goodwill, Kexival shuddered. Wounded humans who claimed they wanted to surrender rather than die in the siege. We welcomed them aboard our medical ships, thinking it was a sign that their resistance was finally breaking. The display showed the infected humans being treated in Thrakari medical facilities, where they unknowingly spread engineered pathogens to their captors. Within a week, half my crew was dying from diseases that didn't exist in nature, Kexival continued. Plagues designed by a doctor who understood both human compassion and Thrakari biology well enough to create the perfect biological weapon. The holographic display shifted to show the final assault on the research station. As Thrakari forces finally breached the outer defenses after months of siege, Engineer Bo had been working throughout the siege to prepare one final surprise. Kexival said he had rigged the entire station's power grid to overload simultaneously, turning the whole structure into a massive bomb. The reconstruction showed human defenders taking positions throughout the station, armed with improvised weapons created from research equipment and maintenance tools. When we finally broke through their defenses, we expected to find broken, demoralized survivors ready to surrender, Kexival reported. Instead, we found humans who had transformed their peaceful home into a fortress of death. The display showed the climactic battle inside the station's corridors, where desperate humans fought with makeshift weapons against professional Thrakari soldiers. They were singing, Kexival whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. As they fought, as they died, as they killed my warriors, they were singing songs we had never heard before. Battle hymns created during the siege passed from parent to child, from scientist to engineer. The hologram showed a young, human girl, barely into her teens, clutching an explosive device while surrounded by advancing Thrakari soldiers. Civilian Chul was just 13 years old, Kexival said, his voice breaking. Her parents had been killed in the initial bombardment, but she had survived, hidden in the station's lower levels. When my soldiers cornered her in the reactor chamber, she could have surrendered. The reconstruction showed the girl's final moments, her young face filled with determination rather than fear. Instead, she looked at my warriors and said, "This is for my mom and dad." and for everyone who won't make it home. Then she activated the explosive device she had been carrying, taking herself and 20 of my soldiers with her. The War Council sat in stunned silence as the implications of what they had heard began to sink in. The station's final transmission came from General Tack himself, Kexavel concluded. As the power grid overloaded and the structure began to break apart, he broadcast one last message to our fleet. You wanted to see what humans do when you threaten our children? Now you know. We don't just fight back. Make sure you never. Forget the price of making us your enemy. The holographic display showed the research station's final moments, exploding in a brilliant flash of light that consumed both the human defenders and the Thrakari soldiers who had breached their defenses. 300 human civilians held off a fleet of 60 warships for 4 months, Kexavel said quietly. When it was over, I had lost 2/3 of my forces, and the humans had taught us that there is no such thing as a non-combatant when you're fighting for survival. He looked around the chamber with his mismatched eyes. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like a species that had decided the only acceptable outcome was making their enemies pay the highest possible price for victory. The War Council chamber fell into absolute silence as Kexavel prepared to deliver his final testimony. His scarred form seemed to shrink under the weight of what he was about to reveal, and even his mechanical implants appeared to dim as if powered by his fading will to continue. Honored Council, brothers who have shared in conquest across 1,000 worlds. Kexavel began, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who had witnessed the impossible. What I tell you now will be my final report as a commander of the Thrakari Empire. After today, I am nothing more than a survivor bearing witness to something that should not exist in our galaxy. The holographic display materialized one last time, showing the edge of human space where stars grew thin and the void between systems stretched like an endless ocean of darkness. The final battle took place in the Outer Rim, at the very border of human territory, Kexavel continued. Admiral Wan commanded their last fleet, a ragtag collection of damaged ships held together by desperation and human stubbornness. Intelligence reports indicated they had fewer than 40 operational vessels remaining. The reconstruction showed the human fleet arranged in a defensive formation, their ships bearing the scars of months of continuous warfare. Hull breaches were patched with metal plates, weapon systems jury-rigged from salvaged parts and engines, running on fumes and prayers. My battle group consisted of 400 ships, Kexavel reported. Fresh vessels with full crews, modern weapons, and unlimited supplies. The odds were 10-1 in our favor. By every measure of military logic, the humans should have requested negotiations or attempted to escape deeper into their own territory. The hologram showed the massive Thrakari fleet approaching the human position, an overwhelming display of firepower that should have broken any enemy's will to fight. Admiral One's response to our surrender demand will haunt me until the day I die, Kexavel whispered. Instead of accepting the inevitable, he transmitted a message that redefined everything I thought I knew about warfare. The display showed the human flagship, battered but defiant. As its communication array activated for what everyone assumed would be surrender negotiations, One's voice was calm, almost conversational. Kexavel continued. He said, Commander Kexavel, you've spent months learning about human military capabilities. Today, you're going to learn about human military imagination. We declare total war on your entire species, effective immediately. Several War Council members shifted uncomfortably at the mention of total war, a concept so extreme that even the conquest-minded Thrakari rarely employed it.